Tonight we're going to explore what hygiene was like back in medieval times. Let's get right into the story. In the misty dawn of medieval Europe, when church bells echoed across cobblestone streets and the scent of wood smoke mingled with less pleasant aromas, the concept of hygiene existed in a world vastly different from our own. Picture, if you will, a time when running water was a luxury reserved for the wealthy few, and the average person's relationship with cleanliness was governed by beliefs, superstitions, and practical limitations that would seem almost impossible to imagine today. The medieval understanding of hygiene was deeply intertwined with religious beliefs, medical theories that now seem quaint, and the harsh realities of daily survival. Water, that most basic element of cleanliness, was often viewed with suspicion and fear. Many believed that bathing too frequently could weaken the body's natural defenses, opening pores to allow disease-causing vapors to enter. This wasn't mere superstition, but reflected the medical knowledge of the time, rooted in ancient Greek and Roman theories about the balance of bodily humors and the dangers of disrupting the body's natural state. The typical medieval person began their day not with a shower or even a thorough washing, but with a simple splash of water on the face and hands, if water was readily available. For many, especially during winter months or in regions where water sources were contaminated or scarce, even this basic ritual was inconsistent. Instead, they might use a damp cloth to wipe away the most obvious dirt and grime, focusing primarily on hands and face, the parts of the body most visible to others and most essential for eating and social interaction. Clothing served as a crucial barrier between the body and the outside world, and medieval people understood this relationship in ways that might surprise modern observers. Linen undergarments, when affordable, were considered essential not just for comfort but for hygiene. These inner layers absorbed sweat, oils, and odors from the skin, and were changed and washed far more frequently than outer garments. The wealthy might change their linen daily, while common folk would do so weekly or even less frequently, depending on their means and circumstances. The process of washing clothes was labor-intensive and time-consuming, often requiring an entire day's work for a household's laundry. Women would gather at rivers, streams, or communal washing areas, bringing harsh soap made from animal fat and wood ash. They would pound, scrub, and rinse garments repeatedly, using stones or wooden implements to beat dirt from the fabric. The sight of dozens of women working together, their sleeves rolled up and skirts hitched, chattering and singing as they labored, was a common one in medieval communities. Personal bathing, when it occurred, was often a social activity rather than a private one. Bathhouses, inherited from Roman traditions, existed in many medieval cities and towns, though their popularity and social acceptance varied greatly by region and time period. These establishments offered large wooden tubs filled with heated water, where multiple bathers might share the same bath. The water wasn't changed between users, so being among the first to bathe was definitely preferable. The wealthy might have their own bathing chambers with metal or wooden tubs, but even then, the entire household often used the same bath water in order of social importance. The medieval diet played a significant role in personal hygiene and body odor. With limited access to fresh fruits and vegetables for much of the year, and a heavy reliance on preserved meats, salted fish, and grains, the medieval digestive system produced different odors than we might experience today. Garlic, onions, and other strong-flavored foods were staples, contributing to breath and body odors that were simply accepted as normal. Spices, when available, weren't just used for flavor but also served as natural deodorizers and were believed to have medicinal properties. Dental hygiene in medieval times was primitive by modern standards, yet people did make efforts to maintain their teeth and fresh breath. Tooth cleaning involved rubbing the teeth with a cloth, sometimes dipped in salt or herbs like sage and mint. Wealthy individuals might use specially prepared tooth powders made from ground shells, bones, or pumice stone. Chewing on aromatic herbs or roots was common practice to freshen breath, and some people used thin wooden sticks to pick food from between their teeth. The loss of teeth was so common that it was simply accepted as a natural part of aging. Without proper dental care, tooth decay and gum disease were rampant, leading to pain, infection, and eventual tooth loss. Many adults had few or no teeth by middle age, which affected not only their appearance but their ability to eat certain foods, further impacting their nutrition and overall health. Hair care in medieval times reflected both practical needs and social status. Long hair was often considered a sign of beauty and vitality, particularly for women, but maintaining it clean and healthy was challenging. Hair was typically washed infrequently, perhaps once a month or even less often, using harsh soaps or herbal preparations. Between washings, people would brush their hair with wooden or bone combs to distribute natural oils and remove loose dirt and debris. Lice and other parasites were constant companions, and elaborate rituals developed around their removal, often involving fine-toothed combs and various herbal treatments. Women often braided their hair or covered it with veils, caps, or other head coverings, both for modesty and to protect it from dirt and environmental damage. Men's hairstyles varied by fashion and social class, but shorter hair was generally more practical for those engaged in physical labor. Barbers served not only as hair cutters but as medical practitioners, performing bloodletting, tooth extraction, and minor surgery alongside their grooming services. The concept of privacy, so central to modern hygiene practices, was largely foreign to medieval society. Homes were typically small, with multiple family members sharing single rooms. Bodily functions that we now consider intensely private were often performed in the presence of others, with little thought given to the embarrassment this might cause. Chamber pots were used for nighttime relief and were emptied into latrines, streets, or nearby bodies of water, often with little regard for the sanitary consequences. Public latrines, where they existed, were communal affairs with multiple seats arranged side by side. Users would sit together, conversing and conducting business while attending to their bodily needs. These facilities were rarely cleaned regularly, and the smell was often overwhelming. In many cases, people simply relieved themselves wherever convenient, in alleyways, courtyards, or even inside buildings, contributing to the general uncleanliness of medieval urban environments. The treatment of menstruation reveals much about medieval attitudes toward hygiene and the female body. Women used rags, pieces of linen, or other absorbent materials during their monthly cycles, washing and reusing these items when possible. The process was often secretive and surrounded by taboos, with menstruating women sometimes considered unclean or dangerous. This stigma affected not only their personal hygiene practices, but their participation in religious and social activities. Bathing during menstruation was often forbidden, based on beliefs that it could cause illness or interfere with the natural cleansing process. These restrictions meant that women might go weeks without proper bathing, relying instead on dry cleaning methods or minimal washing with clothes. The psychological and social impact of these taboos extended far beyond mere hygiene, affecting women's sense of self-worth and their place in medieval society. Seasonal variations dramatically affected hygiene practices throughout medieval Europe. Summer brought its own challenges with increased sweating, insect activity, and the spoilage of food and water sources. People would seek relief in rivers and streams, but these same water sources often became contaminated with human and animal waste, creating cycles of disease and infection. The wealthy might retreat to cooler estates or mountainous regions during the hottest months, while the poor endured sweltering conditions in cramped, poorly ventilated buildings. Winter presented different but equally challenging hygiene obstacles. Heating water for bathing became expensive and difficult, requiring large amounts of fuel that many families couldn't afford. People layered clothing for warmth but rarely removed these layers for washing, leading to the accumulation of dirt, sweat, and odors. Skin conditions like rashes and infections were common during winter months, exacerbated by poor nutrition, lack of sunlight, and the inability to maintain proper cleanliness. The role of servants in maintaining hygiene among the wealthy cannot be overlooked. Noble households employed numerous servants whose duties included preparing baths, washing clothes, emptying chamber pots, and maintaining the cleanliness of living spaces. These servants often had better access to hygiene facilities than common folk, though they were still subject to the same medical beliefs and practical limitations of their time. The intimate nature of these services created complex social relationships, with personal hygiene becoming a mark of status and privilege. Medieval medicine's understanding of disease transmission was limited and often incorrect, but it did influence hygiene practices in interesting ways. The theory of miasma, the belief that diseases were caused by bad air or noxious vapors, led to practices like burning aromatic herbs, carrying flowers or pomanders, and avoiding areas with strong odors. While these practices didn't actually prevent disease transmission, they did contribute to more pleasant living environments and may have had some psychological benefits. Bloodletting, one of the most common medical practices of the time, was believed to cleanse the body of impurities and restore the balance of bodily humors. This practice, performed by barbers or physicians using leeches or sharp instruments, was thought to be essential for maintaining health and cleanliness from within. The resulting wounds required care and cleaning, adding another dimension to medieval hygiene practices. The preparation and consumption of food in medieval times directly impacted personal and communal hygiene. Kitchens were often separate from main living areas due to fire risk, but this separation also helped contain cooking odors and smoke. Food preparation involved handling raw meats, vegetables grown in soil fertilized with human and animal waste, and preservation methods that modern food safety standards would consider dangerous. Meals were often communal affairs, with multiple people eating from shared dishes using their hands or simple utensils. Hand washing before and after meals was considered proper etiquette among the educated classes, but the quality of this washing varied greatly. Finger bowls containing water and sometimes herbs or flowers were provided at formal meals, but the same water might be used by multiple diners, potentially spreading rather than preventing contamination. The storage of food presented constant hygiene challenges. Without refrigeration, preserving meat, dairy products, and other perishables required techniques like salting, smoking, and drying. These methods were effective, but often resulted in foods with strong flavors and odors that permeated living spaces. Root cellars, pantries, and food storage areas required regular cleaning and pest control, tasks that were time-consuming and never fully successful. Vermin control was a constant battle in medieval households. Rats, mice, cockroaches, and other pests were not just nuisances, but serious threats to food supplies and public health. Cats were valued not only as companions, but as essential pest control agents. However, the presence of animals in living spaces, while practical, contributed to odors and hygiene challenges that medieval people simply accepted as part of daily life. The disposal of human and animal waste in medieval cities and towns created some of the most significant hygiene challenges of the period. Urban areas often had primitive sewage systems, if any at all, leading to the accumulation of waste in streets, courtyards, and waterways. The famous practice of throwing chamber pot contents out of windows into the street below was not universal, but was common enough to make walking through medieval cities a hazardous and unpleasant experience. Night soil men, workers who collected human waste from households and public latrines, played a crucial role in maintaining some level of sanitation in larger towns and cities. These workers, often looked down upon by society despite providing essential services, would collect waste during nighttime hours and transport it outside city limits for use as fertilizer in agricultural areas. The process was inefficient and incomplete, leaving many areas contaminated and foul-smelling. The relationship between medieval people and their natural environment influenced hygiene practices in profound ways. Rivers and streams served multiple purposes: drinking water sources, bathing areas, waste disposal sites, and centers for industry like textile dyeing and leather tanning. This multiple usage created complex contamination, patterns that medieval people observed, but didn't fully understand from a scientific perspective. Forest areas provided resources for hygiene practices, including herbs for soap making, medicinal plants for treating skin conditions, and privacy for certain bodily functions. However, these same forests could harbor dangerous animals, bandits, and diseases, making solitary hygiene activities risky endeavors. The balance between utilizing natural resources and avoiding natural dangers shaped many medieval hygiene practices. Religious beliefs permeated every aspect of medieval life, including attitudes toward hygiene and cleanliness. Christian theology emphasized the cleanliness of the soul over the body, sometimes leading to the neglect of physical hygiene in favor of spiritual purification. However, certain religious practices actually promoted cleanliness. The washing of feet during religious ceremonies, the requirement for priests to wash their hands before handling sacred objects, and the emphasis on clean altar linens and religious vestments. Monastic communities often maintained higher standards of cleanliness than secular society. Monasteries had rules about bathing, clean clothing, and the maintenance of communal living spaces. However, some religious orders embraced deliberate uncleanliness as a form of mortification of the flesh, believing that bodily discomfort and social rejection due to poor hygiene would bring them closer to spiritual enlightenment. The medical understanding of skin and its functions was primitive, but did influence hygiene practices. Medieval physicians recognized that the skin served as a barrier between the body and the external world, and they understood that maintaining this barrier was important for health. However, their treatments for skin conditions were often harsh and sometimes counterproductive, involving caustic substances, bloodletting, or other practices that modern medicine would consider harmful. Cosmetics and personal grooming among the wealthy classes reveal interesting aspects of medieval hygiene practices. Face paints, powders, and oils were used not only for beauty, but also to mask odors and create barriers against environmental pollutants. These cosmetics were often made from toxic substances like lead and mercury, creating long-term health problems even as they provided short-term aesthetic and perceived hygienic benefits. The practice of perfuming the body and clothing was widespread among those who could afford it. Perfumes served multiple purposes, masking unpleasant odors, demonstrating wealth and status, and supposedly protecting against disease through their aromatic properties. The creation of perfumes involved distilling flowers, herbs, and spices, processes that were closely guarded secrets among professional perfumers and apothecaries. Jewelry and accessories played roles in medieval hygiene practices that might surprise modern observers. Certain metals were believed to have purifying properties, and wearing them was thought to protect against disease and evil influences. Rings, bracelets, and pendants often contained aromatic substances, or were designed to hold small amounts of perfume or medicinal herbs. The communal nature of medieval society affected hygiene practices in numerous ways. Privacy was rare, and personal habits were often subject to community observation and judgment. This social pressure could encourage certain hygiene practices. People wanted to avoid being shunned for excessive uncleanliness, but it also normalized conditions that we would now consider unacceptable. Sleeping arrangements in medieval homes reveal much about hygiene attitudes and practices. Beds were expensive and often shared by multiple family members or even strangers in inns and hostels. Bed linens, when available, were changed infrequently, and mattresses were typically stuffed with straw, feathers, or other organic materials that provided breeding grounds for insects and parasites. Bed bugs, fleas, and lice were constant companions, and elaborate rituals developed around their management and removal. The preparation of textiles for hygiene purposes was a significant household activity. Making soap involved collecting animal fats, wood ash, and other materials, then boiling and processing them through lengthy procedures that required skill and experience. The resulting soap was harsh and often caustic, capable of cleaning but also damaging to skin and fabric with repeated use. Textile dyeing and treatment processes also affected hygiene practices. The chemicals and procedures used to color and finish fabrics often left residues that could irritate skin or create odors. However, some dyes and treatments had antimicrobial properties that may have provided some protection against bacterial and fungal infections. The heating of medieval homes created both opportunities and challenges for maintaining hygiene. Central fireplaces provided warmth for heating water and drying clothes, but they also filled living spaces with smoke that coated surfaces and clothing with soot and ash. The smell of wood smoke became so pervasive that it was simply accepted as a normal part of indoor air quality. Chimney technology evolved during the medieval period, improving indoor air quality in homes that could afford such innovations. However, most common dwellings continued to rely on simple fire pits with smoke holes in the roof, creating chronically smoky environments that affected respiratory health and made maintaining cleanliness more difficult. The treatment of illness and injury in medieval times often involved practices that would horrify modern medical professionals. Wounds were cleaned with wine, honey, or herbal preparations, but the understanding of infection and sterile technique was virtually non-existent. Surgical instruments were rarely sterilized, and the same tools might be used on multiple patients without cleaning. Hospitals and infirmaries, often run by religious orders, attempted to maintain higher standards of cleanliness than typical households. However, their resources were limited, and their understanding of disease transmission was incomplete. Patients were often housed together in large communal wards where infections could spread rapidly despite the staff's best intentions. The role of midwives and healers in maintaining hygiene during childbirth was crucial, but limited by contemporary knowledge and available resources. Birth attendants understood the importance of clean hands and linens, but their ability to maintain sterile conditions was severely constrained. Maternal and infant mortality rates were high, partly due to infections that could have been prevented with better hygiene practices. Apprenticeship systems in medieval crafts and trades often included training in the hygiene practices specific to each profession. Bakers learned about keeping work surfaces clean. Butchers developed techniques for managing blood and waste products, and tanners mastered the complex chemical processes required to transform animal hides into leather, while managing the intense odors and toxic substances involved in their work. The medieval understanding of air quality and ventilation influenced building design and daily routines in ways that affected hygiene. Windows were small and often covered with oiled parchment or thin sheets of horn rather than glass, limiting light and air circulation. The wealthy might afford glass windows, but even these were typically small and designed more for keeping out weather than promoting airflow. Gardens and courtyards in medieval homes served important hygiene functions beyond their aesthetic and practical value. These spaces provided areas for hanging laundry, disposing of certain types of waste, and growing herbs used for cleaning and medicinal purposes. The design and maintenance of these spaces reflected the household's understanding of cleanliness and their resources for maintaining it. The preservation of meat and other perishable foods required techniques that directly impacted household hygiene. Smokehouse management, salt curing, and other preservation methods created distinctive odors and required specific cleaning routines to prevent spoilage and pest infestation. These processes were essential for survival, but contributed to the complex aromatic environment of medieval households. Brewing and fermentation, essential processes for creating safe beverages in an era when water quality was often questionable, required their own hygiene protocols. Brewers understood the importance of clean equipment and proper fermentation conditions, even if they didn't understand the scientific principles behind these requirements. The management of brewing equipment and storage areas required constant attention to cleanliness and pest control. The social aspects of hygiene extended beyond individual practices to community-wide activities and celebrations. Public festivals and gatherings created opportunities for mass bathing, communal laundry activities, and the sharing of hygiene resources and knowledge. These events also presented challenges as large numbers of people gathered in small spaces with limited sanitary facilities. Market days brought together people from wide areas, creating unique hygiene challenges and opportunities. Vendors had to maintain the cleanliness of their food products and sales areas while dealing with crowds, dust, and limited access to washing facilities. Customers faced decisions about the cleanliness and safety of available goods while navigating crowded, often unsanitary market conditions. The treatment of animals in medieval society directly affected human hygiene practices. Livestock were often housed in close proximity to human living spaces, sometimes sharing the same buildings during cold weather. This arrangement provided warmth and security, but also meant that animal odors, waste, and and parasites were constant features of daily life. Domestic animals like dogs and cats lived intimately with their human families, sharing beds, eating scraps from the same bowls, and providing companionship and practical services. These relationships were valued and essential, but they also meant that human hygiene practices had to accommodate the realities of living closely with animals and their associated smells, parasites, and waste products. The development of specialized hygiene tools and implements during the medieval period reflected both technological advancement and changing social attitudes toward cleanliness. Soap-making tools, specialized combs for removing lice, and improved bathing vessels demonstrated an evolving understanding of hygiene needs and methods for addressing them. Regional variations in hygiene practices across medieval Europe were significant, influenced by climate, available resources, cultural traditions, and contact with other civilizations. Northern European practices differed markedly from Mediterranean approaches, which in turn varied from the hygiene traditions found in areas with significant Islamic influence or contact with Byzantine culture. The Crusades and other forms of cultural contact introduced medieval Europeans to different hygiene practices and products. Returning crusaders brought knowledge of Middle Eastern bathing customs, soap-making techniques, and aromatic substances that gradually influenced European practices. However, the adoption of these innovations was often slow and limited to the wealthy classes who could afford exotic imports. Trade relationships with distant lands affected hygiene practices through the importation of spices, perfumes, soaps, and textile technologies. These luxury goods were often prohibitively expensive for common people, but their presence in medieval markets gradually influenced local production methods and hygiene standards among those who could afford them. The role of guilds in regulating hygiene practices within specific trades was significant but often overlooked. Craft guilds established standards for product cleanliness, workshop sanitation, and the personal hygiene of guild members. These regulations were enforced through inspection systems and penalties, creating some of the earliest systematic approaches to occupational hygiene. Educational institutions, primarily monasteries and cathedral schools, played important roles in preserving and transmitting knowledge about hygiene practices. Medical texts, herbals, and practical manuals contained information about cleaning methods, soap making, and the treatment of hygiene-related health problems. However, access to this knowledge was limited to literate elites, and much practical hygiene knowledge was transmitted through oral traditions and hands-on training. The development of urban planning concepts during the later medieval period began to address some of the large-scale hygiene challenges facing growing cities. Efforts to regulate waste disposal, water supply management, and the location of noxious trades represented early attempts at systematic public health planning, though implementation was often inadequate and enforcement was inconsistent. Legal systems in medieval Europe gradually developed regulations addressing hygiene-related issues, particularly in urban areas. Laws governing waste disposal, water contamination, and nuisance trades reflected growing awareness of the connections between individual hygiene practices and community health. However, enforcement was often weak, and penalties were typically light compared to other offenses. The economic aspects of hygiene in medieval society were complex and far-reaching. The production, trade, and consumption of hygiene-related goods created specialized occupations and trade relationships that influenced regional economies. Soap makers, perfumers, launderers, and bathhouse operators formed important segments of urban economies, while rural areas developed their own hygiene-related crafts and trades. The impact of warfare on hygiene practices was devastating and long-lasting. Military campaigns disrupted normal hygiene routines, contaminated water sources, and created conditions that promoted the spread of disease. The aftermath of battles, with their associated corpses and destruction, created massive hygiene challenges for surviving populations. Siege warfare particularly affected urban hygiene as cities under siege faced shortages of clean water, food, and fuel, while dealing with overcrowding and the disposal of waste and bodies. These conditions often led to epidemic diseases that could kill more people than the actual military action, demonstrating the crucial importance of maintaining basic hygiene even under extreme circumstances. The treatment of prisoners and slaves reveals the lowest standards of hygiene in medieval society. These populations had virtually no resources for maintaining cleanliness and were often deliberately kept in degrading conditions as part of their punishment or subjugation. The contrast between their treatment and that of free citizens highlighted the social and economic dimensions of hygiene access. Pilgrimage, an important feature of medieval religious life, created unique hygiene challenges as large numbers of people traveled long distances with limited resources. Pilgrimage routes developed infrastructure to support travelers, including hostels, bathhouses, and laundries, but the conditions were often crowded and unsanitary. The mixing of people from different regions also facilitated the spread of diseases and parasites. The role of women in maintaining household and community hygiene was central, but often under-recognized. Women were typically responsible for laundry, food preparation, child care, and the general cleanliness of living spaces. Their knowledge of herbal remedies, cleaning techniques, and practical hygiene methods was crucial for family survival and community health. Gender differences in hygiene practices reflected broader social inequalities and different lifestyle demands. Men's occupations often involved outdoor work that made maintaining cleanliness more difficult, while women's domestic roles provided more opportunities for regular cleaning routines. However, both sexes faced similar limitations in terms of available resources and contemporary understanding of hygiene principles. The aging process in medieval society was often accelerated by poor hygiene and health practices, creating additional challenges for maintaining cleanliness among elderly populations. Older adults who had lost teeth, developed mobility problems, or suffered from chronic illnesses found it increasingly difficult to maintain personal hygiene, often becoming dependent on family members or religious institutions for basic care. Childhood hygiene practices were shaped by high infant mortality rates and limited understanding of child development needs. Children who survived infancy were often expected to adopt adult hygiene practices with little accommodation for their smaller size, developing motor skills, or different physiological needs. The transition from childhood to adult hygiene responsibilities was typically abrupt and occurred at relatively young ages. The psychological and social aspects of hygiene in medieval society were complex and deeply ingrained. Personal cleanliness was associated with moral virtue, social status, and spiritual purity, creating powerful motivations for maintaining hygiene practices even when resources were limited. However, these same associations could create shame and social exclusion for those unable to meet community cleanliness standards. Mental illness and hygiene were interconnected in ways that modern psychology would recognize as significant. People suffering from depression, anxiety, or other mental health conditions often neglected personal hygiene, leading to social isolation that could worsen their psychological state. The medieval understanding of mental illness provided few effective treatments and often blamed the sufferer for their condition. The fascinating intersection between medieval hygiene and spiritual beliefs created practices that seem almost ritualistic in their complexity and meaning. Many people believed that certain types of dirt or uncleanliness could actually provide protection against evil spirits or diseases, leading to deliberate neglect of washing in specific circumstances. Pregnant women, for instance, might avoid bathing during certain phases of the moon or after specific rituals, believing that the natural oils and accumulated substances on their skin formed a protective barrier for their unborn children. This spiritual dimension of cleanliness extended to the preparation of the dead, where elaborate washing and preparation rituals served both practical and religious purposes. The deceased were carefully cleaned, often by family members or religious specialists, using specific herbs and preparations believed to purify the soul for its journey to the afterlife. These death-related hygiene practices were among the most thorough and careful cleaning procedures in medieval society, reflecting the profound importance placed on spiritual cleanliness, even when physical cleanliness was often neglected. The seasonal rhythms that governed medieval life created cyclical patterns of hygiene that followed natural and agricultural calendars. Spring cleaning was a literal necessity, as homes that had been sealed against winter, whether needed thorough airing, cleaning, and pest control once warmer weather arrived. Families would remove accumulated soot, replace straw bedding that had become infested with insects, and wash linens and clothing that had been worn continuously through the cold months. Summer brought opportunities for more frequent bathing and laundering, but also increased challenges with food spoilage, insect activity, and the stronger odors that accompanied warmer weather. The rhythm of agricultural work meant that the dirtiest, most physically demanding tasks occurred during the growing season, when opportunities for cleaning were also at their greatest. Harvest time created particular hygiene challenges as people worked long hours in dusty fields, often sleeping in barns or temporary shelters with minimal washing facilities. Autumn preparation for winter included not only food preservation and fuel gathering, but also the hygiene-related tasks of preparing clothing, bedding, and living spaces for months of reduced cleaning opportunities. Families would wash and repair their warmest clothing, prepare additional layers of bedding, and ensure that their limited supplies of soap and cleaning materials would last through the cold months when production would be difficult or impossible. The social hierarchy of medieval society was reflected in hygiene practices in ways that reinforced class distinctions and social boundaries. Nobles and wealthy merchants had access to imported soaps, perfumes, and fabrics that allowed them to maintain standards of cleanliness that were impossible for common people to achieve. This visible difference in hygiene levels served as a constant reminder of social position and helped to justify existing power structures. Servants who worked in wealthy households occupied a curious position in this hygiene hierarchy. They had better access to washing facilities, clean water, and soap than most people of their social class, but they were also exposed to the higher expectations and standards of their employers. The personal servants who helped with bathing, dressing, and grooming their masters and mistresses became skilled in hygiene practices that they might never be able to apply to their own lives with the same level of luxury. The concept of contagion, while not scientifically understood, did exist in medieval thinking and influenced hygiene practices in interesting ways. People observed that certain diseases seemed to spread from person to person, leading to practices like isolating the sick, burning the belongings of plague victims, and avoiding contact with people who appeared unwell. These observations led to some effective hygiene practices, even though the underlying mechanisms weren't understood. Quarantine practices, particularly during plague outbreaks, represented some of the most systematic hygiene efforts of the medieval period. Entire households or neighborhoods might be sealed off, with guards preventing entry or exit until the danger had passed. Within these quarantined areas, people often maintained higher standards of cleanliness than usual, perhaps sensing instinctively that cleanliness was connected to survival, even if they couldn't explain why. The development of medical knowledge during the medieval period slowly began to change some hygiene practices, particularly among educated elites who had access to translated classical texts and contemporary medical treatises. Physicians began to recommend specific cleaning routines, dietary modifications, and environmental changes that went beyond traditional folk practices, though many of these recommendations were still based on incorrect theories about disease causation and bodily function. The practice of bloodletting, so central to medieval medicine, created its own hygiene requirements and challenges. The instruments used for bloodletting needed to be sharp and relatively clean, though sterilization was not understood. The wounds created by bloodletting required care and cleaning to prevent infection, though the methods used were often inadequate. The blood itself had to be disposed of properly, creating additional hygiene considerations for both patients and practitioners. Urine analysis was another common medieval medical practice that involved hygiene considerations. Physicians would examine the color, smell, and consistency of patients' urine to diagnose illnesses and recommend treatments. This practice required the collection and handling of urine samples, creating specific procedures for cleanliness and contamination prevention, though these were based more on aesthetic considerations than scientific understanding of bacteria or infection. The treatment of wounds and injuries reveals both the strengths and weaknesses of medieval hygiene understanding. People recognized that clean wounds healed better than dirty ones, and various cleaning solutions were developed using wine, honey, vinegar, and herbal preparations. However, the instruments used for treatment were rarely properly cleaned, and the understanding of infection was limited to obvious signs of putrefaction and corruption. Surgical procedures, rare and dangerous in medieval times, required the highest levels of cleanliness that contemporary knowledge could provide. Surgeons would clean their hands and instruments as thoroughly as they knew how, often using wine or heated water. However, the same instruments might be used on multiple patients, and the understanding of sterile technique was non-existent, leading to high rates of post-surgical infection and death. The preparation and consumption of medicines created another intersection between hygiene and health in medieval society. Apothecaries and herbalists understood the importance of using clean ingredients and preparation methods, recognizing that contaminated medicines could harm rather than help patients. The grinding, mixing, and storage of medicinal preparations required specific cleanliness protocols that were among the most sophisticated hygiene practices of the time. The role of hospitals and infirmaries in medieval society extended beyond medical treatment to serve as models for communal hygiene practices. These institutions, usually run by religious orders, attempted to maintain standards of cleanliness that exceeded those of typical households. Patients were required to bathe upon admission when possible. Their clothing was often replaced with clean garments provided by the institution, and bedding was changed more regularly than in private homes. The challenges of maintaining hygiene in hospitals were enormous, given the limited resources and large numbers of patients. The same water might be used to bathe multiple patients. Bedding was often shared between patients, and the disposal of bodily waste from bedridden patients created constant sanitation challenges. Despite these limitations, hospitals represented some of the most systematic attempts at maintaining cleanliness in medieval society. The training of medical practitioners included instruction in hygiene practices that were considered essential for effective treatment. While the scientific basis for these practices was often incorrect, the emphasis on cleanliness in medical settings did contribute to better outcomes for patients and helped to establish hygiene as an important component of health care. The intersection of hygiene with food preparation and consumption created daily opportunities for maintaining or compromising health in medieval society. The preparation of meals involved handling raw ingredients that might be contaminated with soil, animal waste, or other pollutants. Cooks developed practical knowledge about cleaning vegetables, preparing meats, and identifying spoiled foods, though this knowledge was based on experience rather than scientific understanding. Kitchen hygiene practices varied enormously depending on the resources available and the status of the household. Wealthy kitchens might have multiple wash basins, clean water sources, and servants dedicated to maintaining cleanliness, while poor households made do with minimal facilities and often prepared food in the same spaces used for other activities. The storage of prepared foods created ongoing hygiene challenges that required constant vigilance. Without refrigeration, cooked foods had to be consumed quickly or preserved through methods that often altered their taste, texture, and nutritional value. The management of food storage areas, including root cellars, pantries, and larders, required regular cleaning and pest control to prevent spoilage and contamination. The communal aspects of medieval dining created opportunities for disease transmission that people gradually learned to manage through etiquette and hygiene practices. The sharing of dishes, cups, and utensils meant that the cleanliness of each diner affected the health of all others at the meal. Hand washing before meals became not just a courtesy, but a practical necessity for preventing the spread of illness. The preparation of beverages, particularly alcoholic drinks that were safer than water, required specific hygiene practices that brewers and vintners developed through trial and error. The fermentation process itself provided some protection against harmful bacteria, but the equipment used for brewing and the storage of finished beverages required careful cleaning and maintenance to prevent spoilage and contamination. The social aspects of drinking and dining created complex hygiene challenges as people gathered in taverns, inns, and private homes to share meals and beverages. The same cups might be passed around among multiple drinkers, and the cleanliness of drinking vessels was often questionable. The alcohol content of many medieval beverages provided some antimicrobial protection, but the sharing of drinking containers still facilitated the spread of diseases. The development of table manners and dining etiquette during the medieval period reflected growing awareness of hygiene issues and social refinement. Rules about not touching food that others would eat, not spitting into shared dishes, and washing hands at appropriate times served both social and hygienic functions, though the emphasis was often more on courtesy than health protection. The treatment of drinking water represented one of the most crucial hygiene challenges in medieval society. Many people recognized that water from certain sources could cause illness, leading to the development of preferences for spring water, well water, or water from specific locations that experience had shown to be safe. However, the contamination of water sources was often unavoidable, particularly in urban areas where human and animal waste regularly polluted available supplies. The boiling of water for safety was understood by some people, particularly in the preparation of herbal medicines and certain foods, but it wasn't commonly practiced for drinking water due to the fuel costs and time required. Instead, people often relied on alcoholic beverages as their primary fluid intake, leading to the paradox of mild but constant intoxication being safer than consuming available water supplies. The construction and maintenance of wells represented some of the most sophisticated hygiene-related engineering projects in medieval communities. Well builders understood the importance of proper depth, lining materials, and protection from surface contamination, though their methods were based on practical experience rather than scientific knowledge of groundwater and bacterial contamination. The communal use of wells and other water sources created social systems for maintaining water quality and preventing contamination. Communities developed rules about washing, disposal of waste, and animal access around water sources, though enforcement was often difficult and compliance was inconsistent. The transportation and storage of water in medieval households required containers and methods that could maintain cleanliness while providing convenient access. Clay jugs, wooden buckets, and leather vessels were commonly used, each with advantages and disadvantages in terms of durability, capacity, and ease of cleaning. The heating of water for various hygiene purposes required fuel and equipment that were often in short supply, making hot water a luxury that most people could enjoy only occasionally. The management of fires for heating water required skill and attention to prevent accidents while ensuring that water reached appropriate temperatures for cleaning and bathing. The seasonal availability of water affected hygiene practices throughout the year, with spring freshets providing abundant supplies that had to be stored and preserved through drier periods. Winter presented challenges as water sources might freeze, requiring people to melt snow or ice for their hygiene needs, a process that was time-consuming and fuel-intensive. The quality of available water varied dramatically depending on location, season, and human activity, creating a complex landscape of water sources that medieval people learned to navigate through experience and local knowledge. The taste, smell, and appearance of water provided clues about its safety and quality, though these sensory indicators were not always reliable guides to actual contamination levels. The development of water treatment methods, primarily filtering through sand, cloth, or charcoal, represented attempts to improve water quality using available technologies and materials. While these methods provided some improvement in water clarity and taste, they were not effective against bacterial contamination and could sometimes introduce additional problems if the filtering materials themselves became contaminated. The role of laundresses and washerwomen in medieval society extended beyond simple cleaning to encompass complex social and economic relationships. These women, who were often among the poorest members of society, provided essential services that enabled others to maintain higher standards of cleanliness than they could achieve for themselves. The techniques developed by professional laundresses represented some of the most advanced hygiene knowledge of the medieval period. They understood the properties of different fabrics, the effects of various cleaning agents, and the methods required to remove different types of stains and contamination. This knowledge was typically passed down through apprenticeships and family traditions rather than written instruction. The working conditions faced by laundresses were often harsh and dangerous, involving exposure to caustic cleaning agents, scalding water, and the physical demands of scrubbing, lifting, and carrying heavy, wet fabrics. The irony that those who provided cleaning services often worked in the least hygienic conditions was not lost on medieval observers, though it was generally accepted as an inevitable aspect of social hierarchy. The seasonal patterns of laundry work created rhythms of employment and activity that affected entire communities. Spring and summer provided the best conditions for washing and drying large items like bedding and heavy clothing, while winter laundry was often limited to essential items that could be dried indoors. The social interactions that occurred at communal washing areas created important opportunities for sharing information, forming social bonds, and maintaining community cohesion. These gathering places became centers for gossip, news exchange, and mutual support among women who shared the common experience of managing household cleanliness with limited resources. The development of soap making as a specialized craft represented one of the most significant advances in medieval hygiene technology. Soap makers experimented with different combinations of fats, oils, and alkaline substances to create products with varying properties and applications. The best soaps were luxury items that commanded high prices and were often imported from distant regions known for their soap-making expertise. The guild system that governed soap making in many medieval cities established quality standards, trade practices, and training requirements that helped to improve and standardize soap production. These guilds also regulated the sale and distribution of soap, ensuring that urban populations had access to cleaning products while protecting the economic interests of established soap makers. The ingredients used in medieval soap making included animal fats from various sources, plant oils when available, and alkaline substances derived from wood ash or other natural sources. The quality and characteristics of the finished soap depended heavily on the purity and proportions of these ingredients, requiring considerable skill and experience to achieve consistent results. The production process for soap making was time-consuming and required careful attention to temperature, timing, and mixing procedures. The caustic nature of the materials involved made soap making a dangerous occupation that could result in burns, respiratory problems, and other health issues for those involved in the trade. The storage and aging of soap after production required specific conditions and handling procedures to ensure that the final product achieved the proper consistency, mildness, and cleaning effectiveness. Well-made soap improved with age, developing better lathering properties and becoming gentler on skin and fabrics. The trade in soap and soap-making materials created commercial networks that extended across medieval Europe and beyond, connecting soap makers with sources of raw materials and markets for their finished products. The transportation of soap required careful packaging and handling to prevent damage and contamination during long journeys. The use of soap in medieval households was often restricted to special occasions or specific purposes due to its cost and limited availability. Families might use soap for washing their best clothing, preparing for important social events, or treating particular hygiene problems, while relying on simpler cleaning methods for daily maintenance. The development of specialized soaps for different purposes represented an advancement in medieval hygiene technology, with different formulations created for washing bodies, cleaning clothing, treating skin conditions, or preparing textiles for further processing. The knowledge required for effective soap use included understanding of water temperature, fabric care, and the proper techniques for creating lather and removing soil without damaging delicate materials. This knowledge was typically acquired through observation and practice, rather than formal instruction. The role of perfumers and scent makers in medieval society extended beyond luxury to encompass practical hygiene applications. Perfumes and aromatic substances were used to mask unpleasant odors, repel insects, and create more pleasant living environments. The belief that pleasant scents could prevent disease led to the widespread use of aromatic substances as both personal adornment and health protection. The creation of perfumes required sophisticated knowledge of plant materials, extraction methods, and blending techniques that represented some of the most advanced chemistry of the medieval period. Perfumers experimented with distillation, infusion, and other processes to capture and concentrate the aromatic properties of flowers, herbs, spices, and other fragrant materials. The trade in perfume ingredients created commercial relationships that extended to distant lands, bringing exotic materials like ambergris, musk, and rare spices to European markets. These luxury items commanded enormous prices and were often worth more than their weight in gold, making perfume a symbol of wealth and status. The application of perfumes and scented substances required knowledge of their properties and appropriate usage methods. Different scents were considered appropriate for different occasions, social situations, and even times of day, creating a complex etiquette around the use of aromatic substances. The storage and preservation of perfumes presented challenges similar to those faced in food preservation, requiring containers and methods that could maintain the quality and potency of delicate aromatic substances over extended periods. The deterioration of perfumes due to heat, light, or contamination could result in unpleasant odors rather than the desired fragrance. The medical applications of aromatic substances in medieval hygiene practices included their use in treating skin conditions, respiratory problems, and various other ailments. The belief that certain scents had therapeutic properties led to their incorporation into medical treatments and preventive health practices. The social significance of perfume use extended beyond personal hygiene to encompass religious, ceremonial, and social functions that reinforced cultural values and social hierarchies. The ability to afford and properly use expensive perfumes served as a marker of education, refinement, and social position. The development of local perfume industries in medieval cities created specialized occupations and economic activities that contributed to urban prosperity and cultural sophistication. These industries required skilled craftsmen, trade relationships, and market knowledge that enhanced the overall economic complexity of medieval society. The seasonal aspects of perfume use reflected both practical considerations and cultural preferences, with different scents considered appropriate for different times of year and different climatic conditions. The availability of fresh flowers and herbs for perfume making created seasonal variations in product availability and pricing. The role of merchants and traders in the perfume industry created networks of commercial relationships that facilitated cultural exchange and the transmission of knowledge about aromatic substances and their applications. These trade relationships often introduced new materials and techniques that advanced the art of perfume making. The integration of perfume use with other hygiene practices created comprehensive approaches to personal cleanliness that combined multiple methods and materials to achieve desired results. The coordination of bathing, clothing care, and scenting required knowledge and resources that were typically available only to wealthy individuals. The influence of perfume use on social interactions and personal relationships created subtle but important dynamics in medieval society, affecting how people perceived and responded to each other in various social situations. The appropriate use of scents could enhance social acceptance and attractiveness, while inappropriate or excessive use could have negative consequences. The intricate relationship between medieval hygiene and the changing seasons created a complex tapestry of practices that adapted to natural rhythms and environmental conditions. Winter hygiene presented unique challenges that tested the resourcefulness and endurance of medieval people, as the scarcity of fuel made heating water for bathing a luxury that few could afford regularly. Instead, people developed alternative cleaning methods that relied on dry techniques, using rough fabrics to scrub away dead skin and accumulated dirt, or employing aromatic herbs and powders to absorb oils and provide a semblance of freshness. The psychological impact of winter uncleanliness extended beyond physical discomfort to affect mental health and social relationships. People who were unable to maintain their usual hygiene standards often experienced shame and social isolation, particularly among the upper classes, where appearance and cleanliness were closely tied to social status. The long winter months created a sense of anticipation for spring cleaning that went beyond mere practical necessity to encompass emotional and spiritual renewal. Spring cleaning rituals were elaborate affairs that involved entire communities in synchronized efforts to restore cleanliness and order after months of winter accumulation. Houses were open to fresh air, accumulated soot and grime were scrubbed away, and textiles that had been worn continuously were finally washed and aired. These communal cleaning efforts created opportunities for social interaction and mutual assistance that strengthened community bonds while addressing practical hygiene needs. The preparation of cleaning materials for spring cleaning required advanced planning and resource gathering that began even during winter months. Families would save wood ash for soap making, collect herbs and aromatic plants during the previous growing season, and prepare tools and containers that would be needed for the intensive cleaning efforts that spring would require. The agricultural calendar influenced hygiene practices in ways that extended beyond seasonal considerations to encompass the daily and weekly rhythms of rural life. Planting and harvesting created periods of intensive labor that made maintaining cleanliness particularly challenging, while periods of relative agricultural inactivity provided opportunities for more thorough attention to personal and household hygiene. The relationship between agricultural work and personal cleanliness created practical challenges that rural people addressed through adaptive strategies and specialized clothing. Working clothes were designed to protect the body from dirt and contamination, while allowing for ease of movement and ventilation, while special garments were reserved for social occasions, when cleanliness and appearance were more important than practical functionality. The disposal of agricultural waste and animal manure created ongoing hygiene challenges that rural communities addressed through systematic approaches to waste management. The value of manure as fertilizer provided economic incentives for its collection and storage. But these activities also created opportunities for contamination and disease transmission that required careful management. The integration of animal husbandry with human living arrangements created complex hygiene challenges that medieval people addressed through architectural solutions and management practices that attempted to balance practical needs with cleanliness concerns. The shared living spaces between humans and animals required constant attention to ventilation, waste removal, and pest control. The seasonal migration of livestock created temporary changes in hygiene conditions as animals were moved between different grazing areas and shelter arrangements. These movements required adjustments in cleaning routines and waste management practices that tested the adaptability of rural hygiene systems. The processing of agricultural products for food and other uses created specific hygiene requirements that farmers and their families had to master to ensure the quality and safety of their products. The grinding of grain, preparation of dairy products, and preservation of meat all required knowledge of cleaning procedures and contamination prevention. The social aspects of agricultural work created opportunities for sharing hygiene knowledge and resources among rural communities. Neighbors often worked together during intensive agricultural periods, sharing tools, techniques, and practical wisdom about maintaining cleanliness while performing dirty, demanding work. The economic relationships between rural producers and urban consumers created incentives for maintaining hygiene standards in agricultural products, as contaminated or obviously unclean goods would be rejected by discerning buyers in urban markets. These market pressures encouraged rural people to develop effective cleaning and presentation techniques for their products. The role of women in agricultural communities extended beyond household management to encompass responsibility for many hygiene-related aspects of farm operation. Women typically managed dairy production, food processing, textile production, and household cleaning, requiring them to master complex skills in multiple areas of hygiene practice. The seasonal availability of water in rural areas created cycles of abundance and scarcity that required careful planning and resource management to ensure adequate supplies for hygiene needs throughout the year. The development of water storage systems and conservation practices reflected the critical importance of water access for maintaining basic cleanliness. The maintenance of farm buildings and equipment required ongoing attention to cleanliness and hygiene considerations, as contaminated facilities could affect the quality of agricultural products and the health of both humans and animals. The design and construction of barns, stables, and storage buildings reflected accumulated knowledge about ventilation, drainage, and waste management. The integration of craft production with agricultural activities created additional hygiene considerations as rural families engaged in textile production, food processing, and other manufacturing activities that required specific cleaning procedures and quality standards. The seasonal rhythms of rural life created natural breaks in agricultural activity that provided opportunities for more intensive attention to personal and household hygiene. These periods of relative leisure were often used for major cleaning projects, repair work, and preparation for upcoming busy seasons. The relationship between rural hygiene practices and urban standards created cultural tensions, as rural people encountered different expectations and resources when they visited towns and cities. The adaptation to urban hygiene standards during market visits or other urban activities required rural people to develop flexible approaches to cleanliness that could accommodate different environments. The transmission of hygiene knowledge in rural communities relied heavily on oral traditions and practical demonstrations rather than written instruction. The sharing of techniques for soap making, herbal preparations, and cleaning procedures created networks of knowledge that preserved and transmitted practical hygiene skills across generations. The role of seasonal festivals and celebrations in rural communities created special occasions for enhanced hygiene practices as people prepared for social gatherings and community events. These celebrations provided incentives for thorough cleaning and grooming that went beyond everyday maintenance routines. The economic constraints that affected rural hygiene practices required creative solutions and adaptive strategies that maximized the effectiveness of limited resources. The development of multi-purpose cleaning materials, the reuse and recycling of hygiene-related items, and the sharing of expensive resources among community members reflected the practical wisdom of rural hygiene management. The urban environment created different but equally challenging hygiene conditions that required city dwellers to develop specialized approaches to cleanliness in crowded, polluted, and resource-limited settings. The concentration of people in small areas created problems with waste disposal, water contamination, and disease transmission that were less severe in rural areas, but more intense in urban settings. The development of urban infrastructure for hygiene support included public bathhouses, communal laundries, and waste disposal systems that represented some of the most advanced hygiene technology of the medieval period. However, these systems were often overwhelmed by demand and poorly maintained due to limited resources and inadequate understanding of sanitation principles. The social stratification of medieval cities created distinct hygiene environments for different classes of residents, with wealthy neighborhoods enjoying better access to clean water, waste disposal, and hygiene services, while poor areas suffered from overcrowding, contamination, and inadequate sanitation facilities. The economic opportunities available in medieval cities included numerous occupations related to hygiene services, from bathhouse operators and laundresses to soap makers and waste removers. These service industries created employment for many people while addressing the hygiene needs of urban populations. The regulation of hygiene-related activities in medieval cities included laws governing waste disposal, water usage, and the operation of bathhouses and other hygiene facilities. However, enforcement of these regulations was often inconsistent, and corruption was common, leading to continued problems with urban sanitation. The cultural life of medieval cities included social customs and expectations related to hygiene that influenced individual behavior and community standards. The visibility of personal cleanliness in crowded urban environments made hygiene a more public concern than it was in rural areas. The commercial aspects of urban hygiene created markets for hygiene-related goods and services that were more developed and sophisticated than those available in rural areas. The availability of imported soaps, perfumes, and other luxury hygiene items reflected the greater wealth and commercial connections of urban centers. The environmental challenges of urban living included air pollution from cooking fires and industrial activities, water contamination from waste disposal and industrial processes, and noise pollution that affected the quality of life for city residents. These environmental problems required adaptive hygiene strategies that addressed the unique conditions of urban life. The seasonal variations in urban hygiene conditions were influenced by factors different from those affecting rural areas, including the heat island effect of densely built areas, the accumulation of waste during winter months, and the increased disease transmission that occurred when people were crowded together in poorly ventilated buildings. The development of urban planning concepts during the later medieval period began to address hygiene considerations through the design of streets, drainage systems, and building codes that attempted to improve sanitary conditions. However, implementation of these planning concepts was often limited by financial constraints and political opposition. The role of religious institutions in urban hygiene extended beyond the operation of hospitals to include the provision of hygiene services to the poor, the maintenance of public cleanliness standards, and the promotion of hygiene practices through moral and religious instruction. The integration of industrial activities with residential areas in medieval cities created additional hygiene challenges as dyeing, tanning, metalworking, and other manufacturing processes produced waste and pollution that affected the cleanliness and health of nearby residents. The transportation systems that served medieval cities, including roads, bridges, and waterways, required maintenance and cleaning that addressed hygiene concerns while supporting commercial and social activities. The condition of these transportation systems affected the ability of people to access hygiene resources and services. The cultural exchange that occurred in medieval cities through trade, migration, and travel introduced new hygiene practices and products that gradually influenced local customs and standards. The cosmopolitan nature of urban environments created opportunities for learning about different approaches to cleanliness and personal care. The educational institutions that developed in medieval cities played roles in preserving and transmitting knowledge about hygiene practices, though this knowledge was primarily available to literate elites rather than the general population. The emphasis on cleanliness in monastic and scholarly communities influenced broader urban attitudes toward hygiene. The legal systems that governed medieval cities included provisions for addressing hygiene-related disputes and offenses, though the enforcement of these laws was often problematic, and the penalties were frequently inadequate to deter violations. The social mobility that was possible in medieval cities created incentives for maintaining hygiene standards that would support advancement in social and economic status. The visibility of personal cleanliness in urban environments made hygiene an important factor in social and professional success. The technological innovations that developed in medieval cities included improvements in hygiene-related tools, facilities, and processes that reflected the concentration of skilled craftsmen and the availability of capital for investment in new approaches to cleanliness and sanitation. The demographic changes that occurred in medieval cities, including population growth, migration patterns, and changing age structures, created evolving challenges for hygiene systems and services that required adaptive responses from both public authorities and private service providers. The cultural conflicts that occasionally arose in medieval cities between different religious, ethnic, or regional groups sometimes involved disputes over hygiene practices and access to hygiene facilities, reflecting the ways in which cleanliness could become entangled with broader social and political tensions. The economic cycles that affected medieval cities, including periods of prosperity and recession, influenced the resources available for hygiene infrastructure and services, creating variations in cleanliness standards that reflected broader economic conditions. The political structures that governed medieval cities included officials and institutions responsible for hygiene-related matters, though their effectiveness varied greatly depending on local conditions, available resources, and the political priorities of urban leaders. The artistic and cultural productions of medieval cities often reflected attitudes toward hygiene and cleanliness, depicting both idealized standards of beauty and cleanliness and realistic portrayals of the hygiene challenges that urban residents faced in their daily lives. The Great Transformation, late medieval innovations. As the medieval period progressed toward its eventual transition into the Renaissance, significant changes began to emerge in hygiene practices and attitudes that would fundamentally alter European approaches to cleanliness. The Black Death of the mid-14th century served as a watershed moment, forcing survivors to reconsider many traditional beliefs about hygiene and disease prevention. While the immediate response to the plague often involved increased religious fervor and sometimes even deliberate neglect of bodily cleanliness in favor of spiritual purification, the longer-term effects included a gradual recognition that certain hygiene practices might indeed influence health outcomes. The surviving population after the plague's devastation found themselves with unprecedented economic opportunities as labor shortages drove up wages and created new social mobility. This economic transformation allowed more people to invest in hygiene-related luxuries that had previously been reserved for the wealthy elite. Soap consumption increased dramatically, bathhouse attendance rose, and the demand for clean clothing and linens created new industries and employment opportunities. The traumatic experience of widespread death also led to innovations in medical understanding that slowly began to influence hygiene practices. Physicians who had observed the plague's progression began to notice correlations between cleanliness and survival rates, though their interpretations were still filtered through medieval medical theory. Some began recommending more frequent bathing, cleaner living environments, and better waste disposal as preventive measures against future epidemics. The architectural innovations of the later medieval period reflected growing awareness of hygiene considerations in building design. Wealthy households began incorporating dedicated bathing chambers, improved drainage systems, and better ventilation into their homes. The development of more sophisticated chimney systems reduced indoor air pollution, while providing better heat sources for warming water and maintaining comfortable living conditions. Urban planning concepts that emerged during this period began to address sanitation issues more systematically. Some cities implemented regulations requiring property owners to maintain clean streets in front of their buildings, established designated areas for waste disposal, and created systems for regular removal of accumulated garbage and human waste. These efforts were often incomplete and inconsistently enforced, but they represented important steps toward more systematic approaches to public hygiene. The expansion of trade networks during the later medieval period brought increased contact with Islamic and Byzantine cultures, which maintained different and often superior hygiene practices. European merchants, diplomats, and crusaders returning from these regions brought knowledge of advanced soap-making techniques, sophisticated bathing customs, and architectural innovations that gradually influenced European practices. The development of paper manufacturing in Europe during the later medieval period had unexpected implications for hygiene practices. While paper was initially expensive and primarily used for important documents, its eventual spread provided new opportunities for personal cleanliness. Paper could be used for cleaning purposes in ways that were more hygienic than traditional methods, though this application was limited by cost and availability. The growth of universities and centers of learning created communities of scholars who maintained higher hygiene standards than the general population, and who preserved and transmitted knowledge about health and cleanliness. These institutions served as laboratories for experimenting with different approaches to communal living and sanitation, developing practices that would eventually influence broader society. The Merchant Revolution and hygiene commerce. The emergence of a prosperous merchant class during the later medieval period created new markets for hygiene-related goods and services that transformed the economic landscape of cleanliness. Wealthy merchants competed with traditional nobility in displaying their prosperity through elaborate hygiene rituals, fine clothing, and luxurious bathing arrangements. This competition drove demand for increasingly sophisticated hygiene products and services. The development of banking and credit systems allowed merchants to invest in large-scale production of soap, textiles, and other hygiene-related goods. Italian cities became centers for soap manufacturing, producing high-quality products that were exported throughout Europe. The standardization of soap production created consistent quality standards and brand recognition that encouraged consumer loyalty and market expansion. The growth of maritime trade brought exotic hygiene-related materials to European markets in unprecedented quantities. Spices that had once been prohibitively expensive became more affordable. Essential oils and aromatic substances became available to broader segments of the population, and new materials for soap making expanded the range of available products. The establishment of trading posts and commercial networks created systems for distributing hygiene products to smaller towns and rural areas that had previously relied entirely on local production. This distribution system gradually raised hygiene standards in peripheral areas and created more uniform expectations for cleanliness across different regions. The development of manufacturing guilds specifically devoted to hygiene-related trades created professional standards and training systems that improved product quality and consistency. Master soap makers, perfumers, and textile producers developed sophisticated techniques that were passed down through apprenticeship systems and protected as trade secrets. The financial records that began to be kept more systematically during this period provide insights into household spending on hygiene-related items, revealing that even middle-class families devoted significant portions of their budgets to soap, clean clothing, and personal grooming supplies. These records also show seasonal variations in hygiene spending, with increased purchases before major holidays and social events. The emergence of specialized retail establishments devoted to hygiene products created new shopping experiences and consumer expectations. Apothecary shops expanded their offerings to include soaps, perfumes, and cosmetics, while dedicated bathhouse suppliers provided specialized equipment and materials for both commercial and private bathing facilities. Technological innovations and industrial developments. The later medieval period witnessed significant technological advances that would eventually revolutionize hygiene practices, though their full impact wouldn't be felt until subsequent centuries. The development of more efficient water-powered mills enabled large-scale production of textiles, making clean clothing more affordable and accessible to broader segments of the population. The improvement of glassmaking techniques led to better containers for storing hygiene products, including soaps, oils, and perfumes. Glass vessels provided better protection against contamination and spoilage, while allowing users to see the contents and assess their quality. The development of mirrors, though still expensive, began to change people's awareness of their own appearance and encourage greater attention to personal grooming. Advances in metalworking produced better tools for personal hygiene, including improved razors, tweezers, and scissors for grooming purposes. The production of metal wash basins, bathing tubs, and other hygiene equipment became more standardized and affordable, though these items remained luxury goods for most of the population. The development of more sophisticated water management systems in cities included the construction of aqueducts, fountains, and public wells that provided cleaner and more accessible water supplies. These improvements in water infrastructure supported both public health and individual hygiene practices by making clean water more readily available. The advancement of chemical knowledge, particularly in the areas of soap making and textile treatment, led to better understanding of the properties of different cleaning agents and their appropriate applications. Alchemists and early chemists experimented with various combinations of materials to create more effective cleaning products. The improvement of heating systems and fuel efficiency made it more practical to heat water for bathing and laundry purposes. The development of more efficient stoves and heating devices reduced the fuel costs associated with warm water production, making regular bathing more economically feasible for middle-class households. The innovation of new textile production techniques created fabrics that were easier to clean, more durable, and more comfortable to wear. The development of cotton cultivation in southern Europe provided alternatives to linen and wool that had different hygiene properties and maintenance requirements. Social transformation and changing attitudes. The social upheavals of the later medieval period, including peasant revolts, urban unrest, and religious reforms, created opportunities for challenging traditional hierarchies and expectations, including those related to hygiene and cleanliness. Social mobility became more common, and newly wealthy individuals often adopted elaborate hygiene practices as symbols of their elevated status. The development of more sophisticated court cultures created new standards for personal appearance and cleanliness that gradually influenced broader social expectations. The elaborate grooming rituals of royal courts became models that wealthy merchants and minor nobility attempted to emulate, creating cascading effects throughout the social hierarchy. The growth of professional classes, including lawyers, physicians, merchants, and artisans, created communities of people who maintained higher hygiene standards as part of their professional identity. These groups served as bridges between aristocratic hygiene practices and those of common people, helping to transmit knowledge and expectations across social boundaries. The emergence of more complex urban social structures created new opportunities for social interaction across class lines, exposing people to different hygiene practices and expectations. Markets, festivals, religious ceremonies, and commercial activities brought together people from different social backgrounds and created pressures for maintaining acceptable levels of cleanliness. The development of literature and artistic expression that focused on daily life and personal experience began to reflect changing attitudes toward hygiene and bodily care. Poetry, songs, and visual art increasingly depicted cleanliness as desirable and attractive, contributing to cultural shifts in hygiene values. The evolution of religious thought during the later medieval period included some reconsideration of the relationship between bodily and spiritual cleanliness. While the emphasis on spiritual purity remained paramount, some religious thinkers began to argue that proper care of the body was compatible with, or even supportive of, spiritual development. The role of women in hygiene innovation. Women's roles in medieval society, while constrained by legal and social limitations, included primary responsibility for most hygiene-related activities within households and communities. This responsibility placed women at the center of hygiene innovation and knowledge transmission, making them crucial agents in the gradual improvement of cleanliness standards throughout the medieval period. The expertise that women developed in textile care, soap making, herbal preparations, and household management represented sophisticated technical knowledge that was typically transmitted through informal networks of female relationships. Mothers taught daughters, neighbors shared techniques with neighbors, and servants learned from their employers, creating systems for preserving and improving hygiene practices. The economic activities that women engaged in, including textile production, food preparation, and various craft specialties, required detailed knowledge of cleaning techniques and quality standards. Women who worked as laundresses, seamstresses, cooks, and market vendors developed professional expertise in hygiene-related areas that contributed to overall improvements in community cleanliness standards. The social networks that women maintained through their domestic and economic activities created systems for sharing information about hygiene innovations, product quality, and effective techniques. These informal communication networks often proved more effective than formal institutions in spreading practical knowledge about cleanliness and health maintenance. The healthcare responsibilities that women assumed within their families and communities required knowledge of herbal medicine, wound care, and disease prevention that overlapped significantly with hygiene practices. Women who served as healers, midwives, and caregivers developed understanding of the connections between cleanliness and health that influenced their approach to daily hygiene routines. The religious roles that women played, particularly in monastic communities, often included responsibility for maintaining the cleanliness of religious spaces, vestments, and ceremonial objects. These responsibilities required high standards of cleanliness and attention to detail that influenced broader attitudes toward the importance of cleanliness in spiritual contexts. The artistic and creative work that women engaged in, including embroidery, decorative textile production, and manuscript illumination, required clean working conditions and careful attention to the cleanliness of materials and tools. These activities contributed to cultural appreciation for cleanliness and order while developing practical skills in maintaining clean working environments. Medical advances and hygiene understanding. The gradual advancement of medical knowledge during the medieval period slowly began to influence hygiene practices, though the process was uneven and often resisted by traditional beliefs and practices. The translation of classical medical texts, particularly works by Galen and Hippocrates, reintroduced European physicians to more systematic approaches to health maintenance that included hygiene considerations. The development of medical schools and formal medical training created communities of practitioners who maintained higher standards of cleanliness in their medical practice and who began to recommend specific hygiene practices to their patients. While their understanding was still limited by contemporary theories of disease causation, their emphasis on cleanliness in medical settings contributed to broader appreciation for hygiene's importance. The observation of disease patterns during epidemic outbreaks led some medieval physicians to notice correlations between cleanliness and disease transmission, though their explanations for these correlations were often incorrect. These observations gradually led to recommendations for improved sanitation, cleaner water supplies, and better personal hygiene practices. The practice of surgery, though primitive by modern standards, required attention to cleanliness that exceeded normal social expectations. Surgeons developed techniques for cleaning wounds, sterilizing instruments, though their methods were inadequate, and maintaining clean operating environments that influenced their understanding of hygiene's medical importance. The treatment of skin conditions, dental problems, and other hygiene-related health issues led medieval physicians to develop specialized knowledge about cleaning techniques, medicinal preparations, and preventive practices that contributed to overall improvements in hygiene understanding. The development of hospitals and medical institutions created environments where systematic approaches to cleanliness could be tested and refined. While these institutions often struggled with limited resources and inadequate understanding of disease transmission, they represented important laboratories for developing better hygiene practices. The emergence of medical literature that addressed hygiene topics created written records of best practices and recommendations that could be preserved and transmitted more systematically than oral traditions. These medical texts, though often containing incorrect information, help to establish hygiene as a legitimate area of medical concern. International influences and cultural exchange. The medieval period's extensive networks of trade, pilgrimage, diplomacy, and warfare created numerous opportunities for cultural exchange that influenced European hygiene practices. Contact with Islamic civilizations, which had preserved and advanced classical knowledge of medicine and hygiene, introduced Europeans to superior soap-making techniques, advanced bathing customs, and sophisticated approaches to personal cleanliness. The Crusades, despite their destructive aspects, created sustained contact between European and Middle Eastern cultures that exposed Europeans to different hygiene practices and products. Crusaders returning to Europe brought knowledge of Turkish baths, improved soap formulations, and different approaches to personal grooming that gradually influenced European practices. Trade relationships with Byzantine merchants introduced Europeans to luxury hygiene products, including high-quality soaps, perfumes, and cosmetics that had been largely unavailable in Western Europe during the earlier medieval period. These trade relationships also transmitted knowledge about production techniques and quality standards. The growth of pilgrimage routes created international networks of travelers who shared knowledge about hygiene practices and products from different regions. Pilgrimage hostels and way stations developed systems for accommodating travelers' hygiene needs that influenced local practices and expectations. Diplomatic relationships between European courts and those of other civilizations created opportunities for cultural exchange that included sharing of hygiene practices and luxury products. Marriage alliances, treaty negotiations, and court visits exposed European elites to different standards and approaches to personal cleanliness. The activities of merchants, missionaries, and scholars who traveled extensively created networks for transmitting practical knowledge about hygiene innovations and products. These individuals often served as bridges between different cultural approaches to cleanliness and health maintenance. The influence of imported products, including spices, textiles, and manufactured goods, gradually changed European expectations and standards for quality and cleanliness. Exposure to superior products from other cultures created demand for improvements in local production and quality standards. The transformation of domestic architecture. The evolution of domestic architecture during the later medieval period reflected growing awareness of hygiene considerations and increasing prosperity that allowed for investment in cleanliness-supporting infrastructure. Wealthy households began incorporating dedicated spaces for bathing, improved systems for waste disposal, and better ventilation that supported higher standards of cleanliness. The development of more sophisticated heating systems made it practical to maintain comfortable temperatures in bathing areas and to heat water more efficiently. The installation of fireplaces, improved chimneys, and heating ducts created environments where regular bathing became more comfortable and practical. The improvement of water supply systems within buildings, including the installation of pipes, pumps, and storage systems, made clean water more accessible for hygiene purposes. Wealthy households invested in private wells, cisterns, and distribution systems that reduced the labor required for maintaining cleanliness. The creation of specialized rooms for different hygiene activities, including bathing chambers, laundry areas, and storage spaces for clean textiles, reflected growing appreciation for the complexity of maintaining cleanliness and the value of organizing these activities efficiently. The development of better drainage and sewage systems within buildings addressed waste disposal challenges that had previously made maintaining cleanliness more difficult. The installation of drains, sewers, and waste removal systems created healthier living environments that supported better hygiene practices. The improvement of ventilation systems, including the installation of windows, vents, and air circulation systems, created healthier indoor environments that reduced odors and improved air quality. Better ventilation also supported textile care by providing better drying conditions for laundered items. The use of new building materials, including improved stones, mortars, and metal fittings, created more durable and easier to clean surfaces within homes. These materials supported higher standards of cleanliness by being easier to maintain and less likely to harbor dirt and pests. Economic impact and market development. The growing market for hygiene-related products and services during the later medieval period created significant economic opportunities and contributed to the development of commercial systems that would continue to evolve in subsequent centuries. The soap industry alone became a major economic sector, with specialized production centers, trade networks, and quality standards that influenced broader commercial development. The development of credit and banking systems supported investment in hygiene-related industries by providing capital for expanding production, improving facilities, and developing new products. Italian banking houses financed soap production, textile manufacturing, and other hygiene-related industries throughout Europe. The establishment of quality standards and regulatory systems for hygiene products created consumer confidence that encouraged market expansion and product innovation. Guild regulations, market inspections, and quality certifications helped to establish trust between producers and consumers in hygiene-related markets. The development of specialized retail systems for hygiene products created new commercial opportunities and improved access to cleaning supplies for consumers. The emergence of dedicated shops, market stalls, and traveling merchants specializing in hygiene products made these goods more widely available. The growth of employment in hygiene-related industries created economic opportunities for people at various skill levels, from unskilled laborers in soap production to highly skilled perfumers and cosmeticians. These industries provided economic advancement opportunities, particularly for women who had expertise in related domestic activities. The taxation and regulation of hygiene-related trades provided revenue for municipal and royal governments, while creating systems for monitoring and controlling these industries. Tax records from this period provide valuable insights into the scale and importance of hygiene-related economic activities. The development of international trade in hygiene products created commercial relationships that extended across national boundaries and contributed to cultural exchange and diplomatic relationships. The export of high-quality soaps, perfumes, and textiles became important sources of foreign currency for some regions. Environmental considerations and resource management. The increasing emphasis on cleanliness during the later medieval period created environmental challenges that communities had to address through improved resource management and waste disposal systems. The greater consumption of soap, increased frequency of bathing, and higher standards for textile cleanliness created new demands on water supplies and waste disposal systems. The development of more sustainable approaches to resource use in hygiene activities reflected growing awareness of environmental limitations and the need for efficient use of available materials. Communities developed systems for recycling wash water, reusing cleaning materials, and managing waste products from soap production and textile care. The impact of increased hygiene activities on local water supplies required communities to develop better systems for water management, including improved wells, springs management, and water distribution systems. The contamination of water sources from increased washing and waste disposal activities led to efforts to separate different types of water use. The management of waste products from hygiene activities, including used wash water, soap residues, and textile waste, required communities to develop systematic approaches to waste disposal that minimized environmental contamination while supporting continued hygiene activities. The sustainable harvesting of materials used in hygiene products, including plant materials for soap making, herbs for cleaning preparations, and wood for fuel, required communities to develop management practices that ensured continued availability of these resources. The balance between individual hygiene needs and community resource limitations created social systems for managing access to water, fuel, and other hygiene-supporting resources. These systems often involved sharing arrangements, scheduling systems, and community oversight of resource use. The legacy of medieval hygiene practices. As the medieval period drew to a close and European society began its transformation toward the Renaissance and early modern era, the hygiene practices that had developed over centuries of adaptation, innovation, and cultural exchange provided important foundations for future developments. The knowledge, techniques, and social systems that medieval people had developed for maintaining cleanliness would continue to evolve, but remained influential for centuries to come. The technical knowledge that medieval soap makers, textile workers, and other hygiene specialists had developed provided essential foundations for the industrial developments that would transform hygiene practices in subsequent centuries. The understanding of chemical processes, material properties, and production techniques that medieval craftsmen had accumulated through experience provided starting points for more systematic and scientific approaches to hygiene product development. The social systems that medieval communities had developed for managing hygiene resources, sharing knowledge, and maintaining community standards created frameworks that continued to influence social organization around cleanliness issues. The guild systems, regulatory approaches, and community cooperation mechanisms that medieval people had developed provided models for organizing hygiene-related activities in larger and more complex societies. The architectural innovations that medieval builders had developed for supporting hygiene activities, including water supply systems, waste disposal methods, and specialized spaces for cleaning activities, provided foundations for the more sophisticated infrastructure that would emerge in later periods. The experience that medieval communities had gained in planning and maintaining hygiene-supporting infrastructure informed subsequent urban planning and architectural developments. The cultural attitudes toward cleanliness that had emerged during the medieval period including the association of cleanliness with social status, moral virtue, and health maintenance, continued to influence European approaches to hygiene for centuries after the medieval period ended. These cultural values provided motivation for continued investment in hygiene improvements and innovation. The international networks that medieval merchants, diplomats, and travelers had established for sharing hygiene-related knowledge and products created foundations for the global exchange of hygiene innovations that would accelerate during the early modern period. The trade relationships and cultural connections that medieval people had developed provided channels for continued transmission of hygiene knowledge and techniques. Conclusion: the enduring lessons of medieval cleanliness. The story of medieval hygiene reveals a complex tapestry of human adaptation, innovation, and social organization that challenges many modern assumptions about historical cleanliness and demonstrates the remarkable resourcefulness of medieval people in addressing fundamental human needs under challenging circumstances. Despite significant limitations in scientific knowledge, available technology, and economic resources, medieval communities developed sophisticated systems for maintaining cleanliness that supported both individual health and social cohesion. The medieval experience demonstrates that hygiene practices are always embedded within broader social, economic, and cultural systems that shape both the possibilities and limitations for maintaining cleanliness. The interplay between individual needs and community resources, between traditional knowledge and innovative adaptation, and between practical necessity and cultural values, created dynamic systems that evolved continuously throughout the medieval period. The ingenuity that medieval people demonstrated in developing cleaning techniques, managing limited resources, and creating social systems for supporting hygiene activities provides inspiration for contemporary efforts to address hygiene challenges in resource-limited settings. The medieval emphasis on community cooperation, knowledge sharing, and adaptive innovation offers valuable lessons for modern approaches to public health and sanitation. The gradual improvements in medieval hygiene practices demonstrate the importance of sustained effort, accumulated knowledge, and social investment in creating better living conditions. The medieval experience shows that significant improvements in cleanliness and health are possible even without advanced technology, given sufficient social organization, cultural commitment, and practical innovation. The medieval story also reveals the complex relationships between cleanliness, social status, and cultural values that continue to influence contemporary hygiene practices. The medieval experience of using cleanliness as a marker of social distinction, moral virtue, and cultural sophistication provides insights into the non-practical dimensions of hygiene that affect how individuals and communities approach cleanliness issues. The resilience that medieval people demonstrated in maintaining hygiene practices, despite wars, epidemics, economic disruptions, and environmental challenges, offers perspectives on the fundamental importance of cleanliness for human dignity and social stability. The medieval experience suggests that investment in hygiene infrastructure and practices, provides returns that extend far beyond immediate health benefits to encompass social cohesion, economic productivity, and cultural development. The diversity of medieval hygiene practices across different regions, social classes, and time periods demonstrates the importance of adaptive approaches that respond to local conditions, available resources, and cultural preferences. The medieval experience suggests that effective hygiene systems must be flexible, locally appropriate, and culturally acceptable to achieve sustainable improvements in cleanliness and health. As we reflect on the medieval journey through cleanliness and survival, we can appreciate both the distance we have traveled in terms of hygiene knowledge and technology, and the continuities that connect medieval hygiene challenges with contemporary concerns about public health, environmental sustainability, and social equity in access to cleanliness resources. The medieval story reminds us that hygiene is fundamentally about human dignity, community cooperation, and the endless human capacity for adaptation and improvement in the face of challenging circumstances. The men and women who lived through the medieval centuries, who developed ingenious solutions to cleaning challenges, who created communities that supported cleanliness despite severe limitations, and who gradually built the foundations for future improvements in hygiene practices, deserve recognition for their contributions to human progress. Their story is not one of ignorance or neglect, but of resourcefulness, innovation, and determination to maintain human dignity through the fundamental act of staying clean.